The Black Ridge Riders thought they owned the Arizona Territory. For 6 brutal years, their outlaw band had carved a bloody empire through intimidation and cold-blooded violence, leaving a trail of burning homesteads across 3 territories. But on a moonless desert night in the summer of 1878, they made a fatal mistake that would become whispered legend around campfires for generations to come. They kidnapped Thomas Hargrove, unaware his mother had spent months meticulously poisoning their only water source. The Black Ridge Riders saw what they wanted to see, a simple widow struggling to keep her small ranch alive, an easy target to pressure into selling her strategic water rights. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What their greedy eyes couldn't see was the shadow behind Martha Hargrove's weather-worn smile, the same shadow that had haunted battlefield surgeons during the bloodiest days of the Civil War, the woman who had mastered the botanical science of both healing and killing under artillery fire at Antietam. The legend they called the Healer, because if you knew what she was truly capable of, it was already too late. Now, as the Black Ridge Riders celebrate their latest intimidation at their hidden canyon hideout, surrounded by the territory's most ruthless killers, Martha Hargrove is exactly where she wants to be, her carefully cultivated herbs slowly dissolving in their drinking water, invisible to their arrogant eyes, because sometimes justice demands patience, sometimes it takes a ghost from the past to bring down an empire. And the Black Ridge Riders are about to learn why, even years later, hardened soldiers still speak her name in hushed tones around campfires. The relentless Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Juniper Canyon, turning the sprawling landscape into a shimmering mirage of heat and dust. 20 miles outside the small settlement of Redemption Springs, a modest ranch house stood in defiant isolation, its weathered wooden structure a testament to frontier determination. Inside, Martha Hargrove moved with practiced efficiency, her boots leaving precise tracks in the thin layer of dust that had settled overnight. To anyone watching, she looked like any other frontier widow starting her day. A 42-year-old woman, managing her late husband's struggling ranch alone. Nothing remarkable about her faded calico dress, worn boots, or the sun-bleached bonnet that shadowed her features. But Martha never stopped watching back, even in the presumed safety of her own home. The wall calendar caught her attention as she prepared morning coffee. 6 months since she'd returned to Redemption Springs. 6 months of careful planning, of building her facade, of becoming invisible in plain sight. The tin cup in her hand bore the faded inscription J.H., a reminder of her husband Jacob's 15 years working this land before a Black Ridge bullet took him the previous winter. Martha moved to the window, scanning the perimeter of her property with practiced precision. She caught a glimpse of movement in the distance, riders making their third pass along the property's border this week. Same gang colors, different men. The Black Ridge Riders were growing bolder. Inside the ranch house, her son Thomas was already at the kitchen table, his pencil moving across paper with quick, determined strokes. At 19, Thomas Hargrove carried himself with the thoughtful intensity of the engineer he aspired to become. Calculations for a new type of windmill spread before him, shirt sleeves rolled up despite the heat, his father's old pocket watch carefully placed beside his work. "They're back again," Martha said, without looking away from the window as she continued to track the rider's movement. Thomas tensed, but didn't raise his eyes from the drawings. "4th pass this week," he noted, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Sheriff Coleman says they're just passing through, heading to the new Silver Strike near Black Mesa. Is that what he says?" Martha's voice carried a careful neutrality that anyone who truly knew her would recognize as dangerous. She set her coffee down and pulled a chair across from her son. "And you believe that?" Thomas finally looked up, meeting his mother's steady gaze. Mother and son shared the same deep-set hazel eyes, though Thomas's reflected the straightforward honesty of a young man who'd spent his life working with practical problems of water and earth. Martha held something harder, something that seemed to evaluate and calculate on a level beyond simple mathematics. "No," he admitted, "not after what happened to the Wilcox family last month or the threats to Henderson's General Store. But what else can we do? The water rights are already filed with the Territorial Office." Martha's face remained impassive, but her mind was cataloguing, processing, planning. The water rights claim had been Thomas's idea, a legal declaration, documenting their ownership of the crucial spring that fed not only their ranch, but potentially the entire Eastern Valley. Thomas had surveyed the land, drawn the maps, and presented evidence to the Territorial Office. It was the act of a good son, a man who believed in the system and progress. It was also the act of a man who didn't truly understand the nature of the predators circling their small ranch. "We could withdraw it," Thomas suggested, though his tone indicated he already knew her answer. "It's not about the water rights," Martha replied, her voice carrying an edge she rarely allowed herself. "The Black Ridge Riders have bought or intimidated their way into controlling every water source along the Eastern Territory. This legal challenge is just slowing them down." She moved to a hand-drawn map of the territory that hung beside an old family photograph. Martha, Thomas, and Jacob standing in front of their newly built ranch house 7 years ago. Her finger traced the route of the old wagon trail that cut through the northern part of the territory. "Perfect route for moving stolen silver," she said quietly. "Connects to the railroad, minimal law enforcement presence, good sight lines for spotting trouble." Her assessment was automatic, professional, the kind of evaluation she'd performed countless times in her former life. Thomas watched his mother with a mixture of concern and curiosity. After Jacob's death, Martha had disappeared for nearly 4 months, only occasionally sending word that she was alive. When she'd returned, something had changed in her. Something harder, more focused, as if she'd come back with a purpose beyond simply reclaiming her husband's property. "You sound like you've given this a lot of thought," he observed carefully. Martha's expression shifted into something more casual, more aligned with the ranch widow she appeared to be. "Just thinking out loud. Your father always said to understand. Outlaws, you have to think about what they want and what they're willing to do to get it." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, not the single riders from earlier, but multiple mounts, heavy and purposeful. Martha moved to the window with fluid efficiency, her stance changing subtly. Thomas wouldn't notice the transition, but in that moment the widow became something else entirely, a predator assessing threats. 3 riders approached the house, each bearing the distinctive blood-red bandanas of the Black Ridge Riders. The center horseman pulled ahead, a man whose very posture spoke of casual violence and absolute authority. Emmett Wade, leader of the Black Ridge Riders. Former Confederate cavalry officer suspected of orchestrating a criminal operation that stretched across 3 territories. He'd transformed a small gang of deserters into a sophisticated network dealing in protection rackets, water rights control, and silver theft. His appearance at the Hargrove Ranch wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. "Stay inside," Martha told Thomas, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had once commanded field hospitals during the bloodiest battles of the war. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, stay inside." Thomas started to protest, but fell silent at the look in his mother's eyes. In that moment, he glimpsed something beneath the widow's exterior, something that seemed both foreign and strangely familiar, as if he was seeing a version of his mother he'd somehow always known existed, but had never directly witnessed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Martha. stepped onto the porch as the three riders came to a halt in the yard. She noted how they positioned themselves, automatically cataloguing their stance, the way their hands rested near their holstered weapons, the manner in which their eyes constantly scanned for threats. These weren't simple cowboys or common bandits. These were men with training, probably military backgrounds. "Mrs. Hargrove," Wade called out, his voice carrying a practiced charm that didn't reach his eyes. "Beautiful morning for a visit." Martha's posture subtly shifted into something non-threatening, something that projected vulnerability and uncertainty. The exact image of a widow uncomfortable with unexpected visitors. "This is private property, Mr. Wade," she replied, her tone polite but cautious. Wade smiled, removing his hat with theatrical precision. He was in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years under the desert sun. His eyes, however, were cold and calculating, constantly evaluating. "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you, Mrs. Hargrove. The property." He gestured expansively. "My organization has development plans for this region. Plans that could benefit everyone, including you and your boy." Martha noted how his companions subtly spread out, trying to establish dominant positions around the porch. An amateur move. They were telegraphing their intentions to anyone trained to see it. "We're not interested in selling," she replied, maintaining her role as a simple ranch widow. "This property has been in my husband's family for generations." Wade's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Things change, Mrs. Hargrove. Progress comes whether we want it or not. Smart folks adapt." He shrugged, his vest shifting to momentarily reveal the handle of a pistol holstered at his side. "Others, they tend to get left behind, sometimes tragically." Martha allowed a flash of fear to cross her face, feeding their assumptions. Let them think they were dealing with a simple widow and her idealistic son. Let them underestimate her. It's what she'd been planning for months. "Are you threatening us, Mr. Wade?" she asked, allowing a tremor to enter her voice. "Threatening?" Wade spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I'm offering you a way forward. $5,000, well above market value, because I respect what you and your boy have here." His voice hardened slightly. "But that offer won't last forever. Especially with all these legal complications your son seems intent on pursuing." The mention of the water rights confirmed what Martha already knew. The riders had sources within the territorial office, possibly within the sheriff's department itself. The corruption ran deeper than even Thomas had suspected. Martha wrapped her arms around herself, the picture of intimidated vulnerability. I'll need to discuss this with my son." Wade's smile returned, satisfied that his message had been delivered effectively. He reached into his jacket, making one of his companions tense nervously. Martha filed that away. The man wasn't used to real violence, just intimidation. Wade produced a folded paper, holding it out. Martha stepped forward to take it, letting them see her slight tremor. Inside, she was counting weapons, analyzing stances, noting how each man carried himself. Everything told her these weren't just outlaws. Their quasi-military bearing, the disciplined spacing, the coordinated approach, all suggested connection to something bigger, something more organized than a typical gang. 3 days, Mrs. Hargrove," Wade said as he mounted his horse. "Time enough to make the sensible choice." Their hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving Martha standing on the porch. She waited until they were out of sight before her demeanor changed completely. The trembling stopped. Her posture shifted subtly, center of gravity lowering, weight balanced perfectly. This was the stance that had made her a legend in field hospitals, the healer preparing to hunt. Thomas emerged from the house, his face pale with concern. "Ma, what do we do?" Martha turned to her son, letting him see for the first time the steel beneath her quiet smile. "It's starting," she said softly. "They're getting ready to move on something big, something worth killing for." She looked down at Wade's paper, a slow, dangerous smile forming, and they just invited a ghost to their party. Inside the ranch house, on a table tucked in the corner of Martha's bedroom, sat a small collection of journals. They weren't family records or recipe books, but detailed notes on botanical compounds, their effects on the human body, and precise dosages. Beside the journals lay a worn medical kit, not from the local doctor, but from the Union Army Medical Corps, and a single faded photograph with the inscription, Field Hospital at Antietam, Sept. 1862. The widow of Redemption Springs was much more than she appeared, and the Black Ridge Riders had just made the mistake of threatening the only family she had left. Redemption Springs hadn't changed much in the years since Martha had last called it home. The single dusty street still housed the same struggling businesses, though now most sported fresh bullet holes and hastily repaired windows, silent testimony to the Black Ridge Riders' growing influence. Martha steered her weathered wagon outside Henderson's general store, noting 3 saddled horses clustered near the hitching post. Black Ridge horses. She recognized the distinctive Spade brand. Inside, she could hear raised voices. Sarah Henderson's store had been in her family since the town's founding. Now it was about to become another kind of battlefield. Inside Henderson's general store, 2 Black Ridge Riders flanked the counter where Sarah Henderson stood, her face pale but determined. The third, wearing a lieutenant's badge identifying him as Kevin Slater, leaned forward menacingly. "Protection payments ain't optional anymore, Sarah," Slater growled. "Town's changing. Be a shame if something happened to this place." Martha selected a shopping basket, moving quietly through the aisles. Her presence registered. She saw the nearest rider's hand twitch slightly toward his holster. Ex-military or lawman, that telltale gesture, more evidence something bigger was happening with the Black Ridge Riders. "I've already paid the business." "Association," Sarah's voice carried clearly, strained but resolute. "Sheriff Coleman says sheriff ain't in charge anymore." Slater swept a display of local honey onto the floor. "We are. $100 a month starting today." Martha rounded the aisle, her basket filled with normal ranch supplies. She kept her movements deliberate, unthreatening, just another frontier widow doing her shopping. "Oh my," she said mildly, stepping in the sticky honey. "What a mess. Sarah, do you have a mop? I'd be happy to help clean up." The riders turned, irritation crossing their faces. Slater started to speak, but Martha was already moving past them to the counter. "Adding these to my monthly account," she said cheerfully. "And I'll need a pound of that new coffee you got in, the one from San Francisco. Thomas says it's amazing." Sarah blinked, then caught on. "Of course, Martha. I'll get that from the back. Take your time." Martha smiled at the riders. "I'm sure these gentlemen were just leaving, weren't you, boys?" Slater stepped closer, using his bulk to intimidate. "This ain't your business, lady." "No." Martha's smile remained pleasant, but something shifted subtly in her eyes. Later, Slater would try to explain to his brothers what he saw. Something cold, something that triggered instincts he'd learned in combat. "My husband's family helped build this town. Sarah's grandfather saved my son's life during the fever outbreak 2 summers ago. So maybe it is my business." She turned back to her shopping list, dismissing them. The insult was deliberate, calculated. Slater's face reddened, his hand twitching again toward his holstered pistol. "You should be careful, Mrs. Hargrove," growled. "Accidents happen." Martha didn't look up from her list. "Yes, they do. Like 3 weeks ago when your man Dawson had that nasty fallout by Eagle Creek, the one that wasn't reported." Now she met his eyes. "Funny thing about accidents. You never know who might have seen something." The riders exchanged glances. That incident hadn't been reported because it happened during a late-night silver shipment. No one was supposed to know about it. "We'll finish this later," Slater told Sarah, trying to salvage some authority, but his voice had lost its edge. After they left, Sarah sagged against the counter. "Thank you, Martha, but you shouldn't have." They're dangerous." "Yes, they are," Martha began, cleaning up the honey with practiced efficiency. "And they're getting more organized. That's what worries me." Sarah got the mop. "Sheriff Coleman says they're just passing through, part of some big operation moving south next month. Is that what he says?" Martha's voice was carefully neutral. "Interesting, because that's not what his deputy told Elena Mason when they tried to pressure her into selling last month." She worked in silence for a moment, letting Sarah process the implications. The storekeeper was smart. She'd see the pattern. "They're buying up all the land with water access," Sarah said slowly, "or forcing people to sell. But why? It's just desert territory." "Maybe," Martha finished mopping. "But it's also the most direct route between the new Silver Strikes and the railroad. Lots of empty land, no cavalry patrols in some spots, perfect for moving things that need to stay off the main trails." Sarah's eyes widened. "You think there's—" "I think," Martha interrupted gently, "that you should take a vacation. Visit your sister in Tucson for a week or two. I can't— "The store—" Martha's voice was soft but carried absolute authority. "Please. Things are about to change in Redemption Springs. When they do, it's better if certain people aren't around to see it." Outside, Martha loaded her supplies into her wagon. As she climbed onto the seat, she noticed a folded paper tucked beneath the reins, a crude drawing of a gravestone with "Hargrove" scrawled across it. An amateurish threat, but it confirmed her suspicions. The Blackridge riders were getting nervous, pushing harder, which meant they had a deadline. Something big was coming. She drove to the outskirts of town, pulling onto a rocky overlook. From here, she could see Eagle Creek stretching south toward the border. 8 years ago, she had been investigating reports of poisoned water sources during a Navajo uprising. The investigation had led to Arizona territory before her superiors suddenly reassigned her. Now the Blackridge riders were securing water rights along the same route. Her wagon creaked as she reached beneath the seat, removing a small wooden box. Inside lay 6 glass vials filled with clear liquid, each labeled with precise measurements. 3 empty spaces showed where vials had been removed. Martha smiled as she checked her work. Everything was progressing exactly as planned. The afternoon. Sun cast long shadows across the canyon as she headed home. In her rear view, she caught glimpses of a rider following at a discreet distance. Amateur surveillance. They were watching her while she watched them. Perfect. Everything was falling into place. The healer was about to remind the territory why battlefield surgeons still whispered her name with a mixture of awe and fear. But first, she had to give the Blackridge riders exactly what they wanted. One seemingly vulnerable widow and her idealistic son. The perfect targets. The perfect trap. Martha smiled as she drove. Some predators, after all, hunt best from inside the den. Inside Martha's bedroom lay secrets few in Redemption Springs could imagine. Beneath floorboards worn smooth by years of careful steps, she retrieved a leather-bound journal. Its pages weren't filled with a widow's grief, but detailed formulas written in a surgeon's precise hand, dosages, symptoms, timetables of deterioration. Martha's fingers traced the latest entry, dated 3 weeks prior. 3rd delivery to Eagle Creek, gradual onset beginning, estimated full effect 20-30 days. Martha closed the journal and pulled from her apron pocket the folded paper Wade had given her. It wasn't just a deed of sale as she'd expected, but a crudely drawn map marking a meeting point at Serpent's Pass, a narrow canyon 10 miles north of town. The paper carried a faint medicinal smell, and Martha held it to her nose, her eyes narrowing in recognition. Laudanum. Wade was a user, another weakness to exploit. A sharp knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Martha slid the journal back into its hiding place and adjusted her posture to once again become the grieving widow. Thomas had already answered the door by the time she reached the main room. "Dr. Abernathy?" she greeted, genuine warmth in her voice for the first time that day. "What brings you out this far?" The elderly doctor stood in their doorway, his medical bag clutched tightly in gnarled hands. At 70, William Abernathy had been the territory's only doctor for nearly 30 years. His eyes, still sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows, darted nervously around the room. "Martha, Thomas," he nodded, stepping inside and lowering his voice. "I needed to warn you. 3 more Blackridge men came into my surgery last night. Stomach cramps, bloody flux, weakness. Make 7 this month." Thomas closed the door, concern etching his features. "Is it spreading through the town?" "That's just it." Abernathy shook his head. "It's only affecting Blackridge men, only those who drink from Eagle Creek." His eyes locked with Martha's. "The symptoms, they're consistent, with certain botanical toxins, the kind you researched during the war." A heavy silence filled the room. Martha's expression remained carefully neutral, but Thomas looked between them with dawning comprehension. "Mother?" he questioned, his voice barely above a whisper. Martha gestured for them both to sit. The time for some truths had come. "William was more than just our doctor, Thomas. During the war, he supervised my work with the medical corps at Antietam and Gettysburg. Your mother," Abernathy said, placing his bag on the table, "was the finest botanical specialist in the entire Union Army. She saved thousands with her medicinal compounds." He paused, "and eliminated certain threats with the same knowledge." Thomas stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. "The water at Eagle Creek is being slowly contaminated," Martha confirmed, her voice steady. "Not enough to kill, yet. Just enough to weaken, to create uncertainty, to make them vulnerable. When the time comes, Wade's offering to buy our ranch because we control the only clean water source left that feeds his hideout," Thomas realized, his engineer's mind quickly calculating the implications. "But that means—" "It means they'll come for it regardless," Martha said. "The offer is merely a formality. When we refuse, they'll take more direct action." "And you've been planning for this all along," Thomas said, a statement rather than a question. "Since the day they murdered your father," Martha confirmed. "Wade didn't recognize me from the war. Few would connect the widow Hargrove with the healer who served General McClellan." Abernathy opened his medical bag, removing a small amber bottle. "I brought more foxglove extract as you requested. But Martha, I must urge caution. What you're attempting is justice," she finished firmly. "Not revenge, William, justice." The doctor sighed, the weight of his years showing in the slump of his shoulders. "The Blackridge Riders have the sheriff in their pocket. 3 territorial marshals have disappeared investigating them. What makes you think—" Martha's laugh held no humor. "I don't plan to arrest them, William." Thomas stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "This is madness. We should leave, sell the ranch, start somewhere new, and let them continue." Martha's voice remained calm, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "Let them take the next family's land, the next husband's life, the next child's future. They won't stop, Thomas. Men like Wade never do." Before Thomas could respond, the distant sound of galloping hooves drew their attention. Martha moved to the window, her body instantly alert. "Blackridge Rider," she reported, "coming fast, alone." "I should go." Abernathy gathered his bag. "No." Martha's command stopped him. "Stay inside with Thomas. This might be important." Martha stepped onto the porch as the rider skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust. She recognized him as Jeb Carter, one of Wade's younger recruits, barely 20, with a perpetual look of nervous energy. "Mrs. Hargrove," he panted, not bothering to dismount. "Mr. Wade sent me. There's been a change of plans." "What kind of change?" Martha allowed a tremor of fear to enter her voice. "He wants to meet with you and your boy tonight. Neutral ground, the Old Mission Church, to finalize the sale." Carter's eyes darted around nervously. 8 o'clock. Come alone. "We haven't agreed to any sale," Martha protested. "Wade says you will," Carter replied, already turning his horse. "Says to tell you he's not a patient man. 8 o'clock. He spurred his mount, disappearing in another cloud of dust. Martha remained on the porch long after he'd gone, her mind working through the implications. When she finally returned inside, her expression had hardened into something that made even Abernathy step back. "It's happening faster than I anticipated," she said. "They're desperate for clean water. The symptoms are accelerating." "What will you do?" Thomas asked. Martha moved to the fireplace, retrieving a hidden derringer from behind a loose brick. "Spring the trap early." "Martha, no," Abernathy pleaded. "It's too dangerous. Wade never meets anyone without at least 6 men hidden. Nearby, I'm counting on it." Martha checked the small pistol with practiced hands. "Thomas, I need you to ride to Fort Buchanan. Find Captain Reynolds. He served with your father. Tell him exactly what I told you to say if this day ever came." "The message about settling accounts?" Thomas asked, his face pale. Martha nodded. "He'll understand. William, I need you to prepare your surgery for multiple patients." "Martha," the doctor began. "Not for the Blackridge men," she interrupted. "For the townspeople who might get caught in what's coming." A heavy silence fell over the room as the full scope of Martha's plans began to dawn on both men. "You've been preparing for this since before you returned," Thomas said slowly. "The herbs you've been growing, your trips to Eagle Creek, the old army contacts you've been writing to." "Yes," Martha admitted simply. "How many Blackridge men are there?" Thomas asked. 27, Martha replied without hesitation. 17 at their main camp near Eagle Creek. 6 usually patrol the territory. 4 stay with Wade." Thomas exchanged a glance with Abernathy. The level of intelligence she'd gathered was unsettling. "And you've been poisoning their water supply for how long?" Abernathy asked quietly. 3 months. Gradual doses building slowly. By now, most of them can barely stay in the saddle for more than an hour. Their aim is compromised. Their judgment clouded. "That still leaves 27 armed men," Thomas protested. Martha's smile was cold. 24 as of this morning. 3 are already in the ground behind their camp." Thomas stared at his mother, truly seeing her for the first time. This wasn't the woman who'd baked bread and tended garden throughout his childhood. This was someone else entirely, someone forged in battlefield hospitals and refined by personal tragedy. "What's at the old mission church?" he asked finally. "A trap," Martha replied, tucking the derringer into her sleeve. "Either for us or for them. We'll see which." The abandoned mission stood silhouetted against the setting sun, its bell tower crumbling from years of neglect. Built by Spanish missionaries a century earlier and abandoned during Apache raids, it now served as neutral ground between the scattered ranches. Martha approached alone on horseback, her widow's black dress replaced by practical riding clothes, her hair tightly bound beneath a plain hat. She appeared unarmed, but Thomas knew better. His mother carried death in every fold of her clothing, every pocket, perhaps in the very touch of her hands. From his hidden position among rocks overlooking the church, Thomas watched through his father's old spyglass. Despite his mother's instructions to ride for Fort Buchanan, he couldn't leave her to face this alone. What he saw chilled him to the bone. Wade hadn't come with just 4 men. At least a dozen Blackridge riders surrounded the mission, positioned behind crumbling walls and atop the bell tower. It wasn't a meeting, it was an ambush. Martha dismounted calmly, tying her horse to a hitching post as if arriving for Sunday services. If she noticed the hidden men, she gave no indication. "Mrs. Hargrove," Wade's voice boomed from the church doorway. "Welcome. I see you came alone. Wise decision." "Mr. Wade," Martha acknowledged, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "I see you didn't." Wade chuckled, stepping into view. Even from a distance, Thomas could see the man looked unwell. His face was pale, his normally immaculate appearance now disheveled. The poison was working. Simple precautions, Wade gestured vaguely. I'm disappointed. Your boy didn't join us. Thomas is considering your offer, Martha replied, stepping closer. He's young, idealistic, he believes in legal proceedings and territorial law. And you don't? Wade raised an eyebrow. I believe in more immediate solutions, Martha said. That's why I came with a counteroffer. Wade's interest visibly piqued. I'm listening. Martha reached slowly into her pocket, removing a small leather pouch. Your men are sick, Mr. Wade. The water at Eagle Creek doesn't agree with them anymore. But I can fix that. Wade's composure slipped momentarily. You know about that? I know many things. Martha opened the pouch, revealing dried herbs. This will purify your water, eliminate the sickness. In exchange, you leave our ranch alone. You expect me to believe a ranch wife knows about water purification, Wade scoffed, but Thomas could see the desperate interest in his eyes. I expect you to recognize an opportunity when you see one, Martha replied calmly. Your men are dying, Mr. Wade. 3 already in the ground, if my count is correct. How many more can you afford to lose? Wade's hand moved to his stomach unconsciously. Another symptom. And how do I know this isn't some trick? Martha smiled. Because I'll demonstrate. Bring me water from Eagle Creek. I'll drink it first, then purify the rest. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Wade's face. He hadn't expected this turn. Johnson, he called to one of his men, bring the water skin. Thomas watched in horror as his mother's plan unfolded. She knew exactly how desperate these men were, how the mysterious illness was decimating their ranks. She was using their fear against them. As Johnson approached with the water skin, Martha's eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in each hidden gunman's position. Thomas knew she was counting, calculating, preparing. Before we proceed, Martha said, her voice suddenly harder, you should know that I've already treated the water at 3 other points along Eagle Creek. Your men at the main camp drank the antidote with their morning coffee. Wade stiffened. What are you saying? I'm saying, Martha stepped closer, no longer playing the role of intimidated widow, that I'm the reason your men are sick, and I'm the only one who can save them. A deadly silence fell over the mission. Grounds! Wade's hand hovered near his pistol. Who are you? He demanded, his voice barely controlled. They called me the healer during the war, Martha replied, and Thomas saw recognition dawn in Wade's eyes. McClellan's witch, he whispered, his Confederate background revealing itself. They said you could kill a man with a handshake, cure, gangrene with a poultice, identify poison with a single sniff. They said a lot of things, Martha agreed, not all of them exaggerated. Wade drew his pistol, but his hand shook visibly. Why reveal yourself now? Because tonight is when it ends, Martha said simply. One way or another. Thomas raised his rifle, preparing to fire if Wade threatened his mother, but something in her posture told him to wait. She was still in control. You poisoned an entire water supply, Wade said, a hint of admiration in his voice despite himself. Just to get to me. No, Mr. Wade, Martha corrected. I poisoned 1 water supply to save dozens of families from your particular brand of progress. Your death is merely a bonus. Wade's laugh turned into a cough, flecks of blood appearing on his hand. Even if you kill me, my men will tear you apart. Your men, Martha glanced at the increasingly nervous riders emerging from hiding, are already dead. They just don't know it yet. The final stage began this morning when I increased the dosage. Without the antidote, none of you will see tomorrow's sunset. The mission grounds erupted in panic as Blackridge men realized the full implications of her words. Some drew weapons, others backed away in fear. "Kill her!" Wade shouted, raising his pistol, but Martha was already moving, the small derringer appearing in her hand as if by magic. Her first shot caught Wade in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second hit the water skin, spilling its contents into the dust. "The only water source free of poison is at my ranch," Martha announced as chaos erupted around her. "Surrender now, and you might live." Thomas watched in awe and terror as his mother, the quiet widow, the gentle healer, the woman who had tucked him in at night with stories of faraway places, became death incarnate before his eyes. The battle for Redemption Springs had begun, and Martha Hargrove had just revealed her true self to the very men who had underestimated her for far too long. Gunfire erupted across the mission grounds as Martha darted behind a crumbling stone wall. Bullets struck ancient adobe, sending dust cascading around her. From his hidden position, Thomas tracked the Blackridge shooters through his rifle sights, his finger hovering on the trigger. But his mother had been right. Their aim was compromised, hands trembling from the poison's effects. Shots went wide, giving Martha the precious seconds she needed. Through the chaos, Thomas spotted Wade stumbling toward his horse, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Two riders flanked him, providing cover as their leader attempted to escape. Thomas steadied his breath, preparing to fire, when a flash of movement caught his eye. Martha emerged from behind the wall, a second weapon drawn, not another derringer, but a military Colt revolver that had remained hidden beneath her riding jacket. Her first shot dropped one of Wade's protectors. Her second struck Wade's horse, sending the animal bolting into the darkness. Her third caught the second protector in the leg. The methodical precision of her shooting was unlike anything Thomas had ever witnessed. Each movement economical, each target assessed and prioritized with cold efficiency. "Wade is getting away," Thomas muttered, shifting his aim toward the fleeing outlaw leader. "No, he isn't," came a deep voice beside him. Thomas nearly fired in surprise before recognizing the uniform, Captain James Reynolds of the U.S. Cavalry. His father's old comrade, accompanied by a half-dozen blue-coated soldiers. "How did you—" Thomas began. "Your mother's messages have been arriving for weeks," Reynolds said, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the battle below. "Preparations were already underway. We were a day's ride out when we saw your signal fire." Thomas stared at the captain. "But I didn't light any—" A knowing smile crossed Reynolds's face. "Martha has always been thorough in her planning. She anticipated you might not follow her instructions to leave." Below, Martha had taken cover again as the remaining Blackridge men regrouped. Despite their weakened condition, they still outnumbered her significantly. Thomas counted at least 8 still able to fight. "Shouldn't we help her?" Thomas asked urgently. Reynolds placed a restraining hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Watch, your mother isn't fighting alone." As if on cue, riders emerged from the darkness surrounding the mission, not cavalry soldiers but townspeople from Redemption Springs. Thomas recognized Henderson the shopkeeper, blacksmith Josiah Miller, and several ranchers whose properties bordered the Hargrove land. All were armed, their expressions grim with purpose. The townsfolk knew. Thomas whispered in disbelief. "Some of them," Reynolds nodded. "The ones who'd lost the most to the Blackridge riders. Your mother united them, gave them hope that Wade could be defeated." Below, Martha's voice rang out clearly in the momentary lull of gunfire. "Blackridge men, look around you! The cavalry is here. The townspeople have risen, and your bodies are failing from within. Surrender now and receive the antidote, or die where you stand." Several riders immediately threw down their weapons, their faces pale with fear and sickness. Others looked to their lieutenants for guidance, finding only confusion and panic. 3 broke for their horses, attempting to flee, but were quickly surrounded by townspeople. Through it all, Martha moved with deadly purpose, making her way toward the mission's small chapel where Wade had disappeared. Thomas leveled his rifle again. "Permission to provide covering fire, Captain?" he requested formally. Reynolds nodded. "Granted. But remember, your mother wants Wade alive." Thomas fired 3 calculated shots, not at men, but at strategic points, a lantern that plunged part, Of the courtyard into darkness, a support beam that collapsed and blocked one escape route, a water barrel that burst and created a slick hazard. The chaos gave Martha the opportunity to reach the chapel doors unnoticed. Inside the darkened chapel, Wade crouched behind the altar, his breathing labored, sweat beading on his forehead despite the evening chill. Martha entered silently, her footsteps masked by the commotion outside. The chapel's single window cast moonlight across the abandoned sanctuary, illuminating decades of dust and neglect. "It's fitting, isn't it?" Martha's voice echoed among the rafters, "that it should end in a house of judgment." Wade fired wildly toward her voice, the shot going wide. "Show yourself, witch!" Martha stepped into a shaft of moonlight, the Colt held steadily at her side. "I'm right here, Emmett. I've always been right here, watching you destroy lives, waiting for the moment to end it. You think poisoning me is justice?" Wade spat, blood flecking his lips. "I'll be a martyr. My men will burn your ranch to the ground, kill your boy, erase your very name. Your men are either surrendering or dying as we speak," Martha replied calmly. "The cavalry has arrived. The townspeople have risen. Your empire is falling, Emmett. But that's not why I'm here." She moved closer and Wade raised his pistol again, his hand shaking so badly now he could barely aim. "Stay back!" "I'm not here about the water rights," Martha continued as if he hadn't spoken, "or the land grabs, or even my husband's murder." Wade's face twisted in confusion. "Then what the hell do you want?" Martha's next words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. "I want to know about General Hollister's gold shipment. The one you and your Confederate deserters stole in '64. The one you murdered an entire field hospital to cover up." Wade's face went slack with shock. "How could you possibly?" "I was there," Martha said softly. "At Meadow Creek Field Hospital. I was treating wounded from both sides when your men came. You didn't recognize me. I was younger then, covered in blood and smoke. But I recognized you, Captain Wade of the 7th Virginia Cavalry. I watched you execute doctors, nurses, wounded soldiers, all for 12 crates of gold meant for the Union. A payroll. That's impossible," Wade whispered. "We killed everyone at that hospital." "Not everyone," Martha corrected. "I survived. Buried under the bodies of those I'd tried to save. I heard you give the orders, saw your face clearly in the lamplight as you counted your blood money." Outside, the gunfire had stopped. The sounds of surrender and cavalry commands filtered through. The chapel's broken windows. "So this," Wade gestured weakly at himself, at his poisoned body, "all of this was about revenge for something that happened 13 years ago?" "Justice," Martha corrected again. "Not just for the hospital, but for every life you've taken since. The poison in your water isn't fatal, Emmett. Not yet. I needed you weakened but alive. Because you're going to tell Captain Reynolds exactly where the remaining gold is hidden. The gold that funded your rise in the Arizona Territory." Wade's laugh turned into a wet cough. "And why would I do that?" Martha knelt beside him, close, enough that he could see her eyes in the moonlight. "Because I'm giving you a choice that you never gave any of your victims. Confess, return the stolen gold, face a military tribunal, and I'll administer the antidote. Your death will be quick and official, by firing squad rather than by inches as your organs fail." "And if I refuse?" Wade challenged, though fear had replaced the arrogance in his voice. Martha stood, her expression impassive. "Then I leave you to the poison. It will take 3 more days. Your skin will yellow, your insides will liquefy. You'll beg for death long before it comes." Thomas and Reynolds entered the chapel, weapons ready, followed by 2 cavalry soldiers. They found Martha standing over Wade, who had slumped against the altar, his pistol lying useless at his side. "He's ready to talk," Martha told Reynolds, without looking away from Wade. "About Meadow Creek, about the gold, about everything." Reynolds' face hardened at the mention of Meadow Creek. "Sergeant, secure the prisoner, careful. He's evidence in a military investigation now." As the soldiers moved to take Wade into custody, Thomas approached his mother, seeing her clearly, for the first time. "You never came back just for father's murder, did you?" "Your father's death gave me the freedom to finish what I started 13 years ago," Martha replied quietly, "to find the last of the men responsible for Meadow Creek." "How? Many others?" Thomas asked. "7, Martha said. "Wade is the last. The others met justice in different ways, in different territories. Reynolds joined them as Wade was led outside. You should have told me from the beginning that Wade was one of the Meadow Creek deserters. The army has been hunting them since, in '64. Would you have believed me?" Martha asked. "A widow with no proof except her own testimony? No, James. I needed to draw him out, make him reveal himself." "And the poison?" Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Derived from foxglove and several native plants," Martha explained. "Slow-acting, debilitating, but ultimately survivable with the proper antidote. I needed him weak, but coherent enough to confess." Before Reynolds could respond, shouting erupted. Outside, they rushed from the chapel to find one of the cavalry soldiers on the ground, bleeding, and Wade nowhere to be seen. "He broke free," the injured soldier gasped. "Pulled a hidden knife, took Jenkins' horse." "Which way?" Martha demanded, her composure cracking for the first time. "North," the soldier pointed. "Toward Serpent's Pass." Martha turned to Reynolds. "He's heading for the gold. It must be hidden somewhere in the canyon." "In his condition, he won't get far," Reynolds began, but Martha was already moving toward her horse. "He has maybe a day before the poison reaches its final stage," she said, checking her Colt's ammunition. "That's enough time to reach his cache and disappear into the mountains beyond." Thomas grabbed his mother's arm. "You can't go after him alone. He's desperate now, which makes him more dangerous." "I'm not asking permission, Thomas," Martha replied, her voice iron beneath silk. "I've hunted this man for 13 years. I won't lose him now." Reynolds stepped forward. "We'll organize a pursuit at first light. These canyons are treacherous in darkness. By first light he'll be gone," Martha said. "And so will I." She swung into her saddle with surprising agility for a woman her age. Thomas made a decision. "I'm coming with you." Martha started to object, then saw the determination in her son's eyes, the same look his father had worn when his mind was set. "Keep up, then," was all she said before spurring her horse toward the northern canyon. Thomas mounted quickly, but before following, turned to Reynolds. "Get these people back to town. Have Dr. Abernathy treat the wounded riders. There's an antidote in my mother's bedroom, under the floorboards beneath the east window." Third journal from the left has the formula. Reynolds nodded, impressed by the young man's sudden authority. "What about you two?" "We'll find Wade," Thomas said with certainty, "one way or another." As Thomas galloped after his mother, the mission faded behind him, the sounds of victory and justice giving way to the rhythm of hoofbeats and the whisper of the desert wind. Ahead lay Serpent's Pass, a maze of narrow canyons and treacherous cliffs where a desperate man sought escape and a determined woman sought completion of a 13-year quest. The night deepened as Martha and Thomas rode side by side, following a trail only she seemed able to see. Blood droplets on rocks, disturbed gravel, broken branches of sparse desert vegetation. "All these years," Thomas said as they navigated a narrow ravine, "when you disappeared after Father's death." "I was hunting the others," Martha confirmed, "following rumors, tracking movements across 5 territories. And each of them, the poison." Martha's face was stone in the moonlight. "Each received justice appropriate to their crimes, some by the noose, some by the bullet, some by their own hands when cornered. Wade is different. He was their leader, the one who gave the order at Meadow Creek." "Why didn't you tell me?" Thomas asked, hurt evident in his voice. "Would you have understood?" Martha countered. That your mother had dedicated her life to hunting down murderers? That behind every bedtime story and bandaged knee was a woman who had killed 6 men in cold blood? Before Thomas could answer, Martha reined her horse to a sudden stop, raising her hand for silence. Ahead, the canyon narrowed further, its walls rising like the sides of a coffin. Martha dismounted, gesturing for Thomas to do the same. "He's close," she whispered. "The poison is affecting his judgment. He's left too clear a trail." They secured their horses and continued on foot, Martha leading with the certainty of a predator tracking wounded prey. The moon slipped behind clouds, plunging the canyon into near-total darkness. Thomas strained to see, but Martha moved confidently, each step placed with deliberate precision. A sound echoed from ahead, the scrape of boot on stone, followed by labored breathing. Martha froze, then pointed to a narrow side canyon barely visible in the gloom. Thomas nodded, understanding her silent command. He would circle around while she advanced directly. As Thomas crept through the darkness, he reflected on how his perception of his mother had transformed in mere hours. The gentle widow, the skilled healer, had been replaced by this avenging spirit who moved through the night like a ghost. Yet, somehow, both versions were true. Parts of a whole he had never fully seen until now. Ahead, a faint glow appeared, a small campfire shielded by rocks. Wade had stopped, either from exhaustion or confidence that he'd lost his pursuers. Thomas positioned himself on a ledge overlooking the small clearing, rifle ready. Martha approached from the opposite direction, her footsteps silent on the canyon floor. Wade sat hunched by his meager fire, digging through saddlebags with shaking hands. Beside him lay a canvas-wrapped bundle that could only be the gold, or part of it. "Hello, Emmett," Martha said quietly, stepping into the firelight with her Colt aimed steadily. Wade jerked upright, reaching for his gun, but the poison had progressed further. His movements were uncoordinated, almost drunken. "How?" he gasped. "I told you," Martha replied. "I've been hunting you for 13 years. Did you think a head start of a few minutes would save you?" Wade's laugh was hollow, ending in another wet cough. "You're too late anyway. My men at Eagle Creek camp, not all of them are sick. Some never drink the local water. By now they've got your message about my capture. They'll be coming for your boy." Thomas tensed on his ledge, but Martha's expression didn't change. "You mean Slater and his patrol? The ones who only drink whiskey from their private stock?" A cold smile touched her lips. "The whiskey I've been doctoring for the past month every time they visit Henderson's store? They're likely unconscious by now. The cavalry is probably finding them as we speak." Wade's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You think of everything, don't you, witch?" "Not everything," Martha admitted, circling closer. "I didn't anticipate your escape tonight. A small oversight. My last, where you're concerned." Wade leaned forward, his face ghastly in the firelight. "You want to know something funny? I don't even remember Meadow Creek. It was just another raid to me. Just another day in a war that turned men into animals." For the first time, Martha's composure cracked. "You slaughtered 63 people, wounded soldiers, doctors, nurses who had treated your own men just days before. And you don't remember?" "War is hell, Martha." Wade smirked despite his condition. "You of all people should know that." Martha's finger tightened on the trigger, and Thomas prepared to witness his mother's final act of vengeance. But instead, she slowly lowered the Colt. "You're right, Emmett. War is hell. So is revenge." She reached into her pocket and withdrew. "A small vial. This is the antidote. Take it and live long enough to face a military tribunal. Tell them everything about Meadow Creek, about the gold, about every life you've destroyed since. Let justice be served in the light, not in darkness." Wade stared at the vial, then at Martha, confusion evident. "Why would you offer me that now, after all this?" "Because I'm not you," Martha said simply. "I never was. She placed the vial on a rock between them and stepped back. "Your choice, Emmett. Die slowly here, or live to face your judgment." Thomas watched, breath held as Wade considered. The vial. The outlaw's hand reached out, trembling violently now, fingers just brushing the glass. Then, with a sudden surge of desperate strength, he lunged, not for the antidote, but for his discarded pistol. "Die, witch!" he screamed, raising the weapon. 2 shots rang out simultaneously, one from Martha's Colt and one from Thomas's rifle on the ledge above. Wade collapsed beside the fire, the pistol unfired in his rigid grip. Martha stood motionless for a long moment, then slowly holstered her weapon. She knelt beside Wade's body, checking for a pulse she knew wouldn't be there. "It's over," she said, her voice carrying clearly to Thomas. "All of it. Finally over." Thomas scrambled down from his position, joining his mother by the fire. Together they sat in silence as the flames illuminated the gold that had cost so many lives. "What now?" Thomas finally asked. Martha looked at her son, and for the first time since this began, he saw tears in her eyes. "Now we go home. We rebuild. We heal." She touched his face gently. "The healer's work is done. It's time for Martha Hargrove to truly live again." As dawn broke over Serpent's Pass, mother and son began their journey back to Redemption Springs, leaving behind the darkness that had claimed so many lives. The poison that had flowed through Eagle Creek would soon be cleansed. The gold returned to its rightful owners, and the legend of the healer would fade into frontier myth. But in Redemption Springs, a widow and her son would plant new gardens, build new windmills, and find that justice, once served, could finally make way for peace. Dawn broke over Serpent's Pass in streaks of crimson and gold, illuminating Martha and Thomas as they made their way back toward Redemption Springs. Wade's body lay wrapped in canvas, slung across his own horse, the stolen gold secured in saddlebags. Evidence of crimes spanning more than a decade. Neither mother nor son had spoken much since the confrontation at the campfire, each lost in private reflections on how their world had transformed in a single night. As they emerged from the canyon's mouth, they spotted dust clouds rising from the direction of town. Riders approaching at speed. Martha's hand moved instinctively to her revolver before recognizing the blue uniforms of Captain Reynolds and his cavalry patrol. "Martha!" Reynolds called as they drew near. "Thank God we found you." His expression was grim, his uniform stained. With smoke and what looked distinctly like blood, Martha reined her horse to a stop, instantly alert. "What's happened, James?" Wade's second-in-command, Dixon. "He wasn't at Eagle Creek with the others," Reynolds reported breathlessly. "Must have been out recruiting. Returned with 15 new men just before dawn. They attacked the town." Thomas felt his blood turn to ice. "The townspeople fighting back when we left to find you," Reynolds assured him. "We've got men positioned at strategic points, but Dixon's crew isn't suffering from your poison. They're at full strength and well-armed." Martha's expression hardened, the weariness of the night's pursuit vanishing instantly. "Casualties?" "2 of my men wounded. Henderson took a bullet to the arm defending his store. The blacksmith Miller." Reynolds hesitated. He didn't make it. Thomas saw a flash of pain cross his mother's face, a rare crack in her composed exterior. Miller had been his father's friend, had taught Thomas his first lessons in metalworking. "What about Dr. Abernathy?" Martha asked, her voice tightly controlled, barricaded in his surgery with the wounded. "Dixon's men haven't breached it yet, but they're focused on finding you two." Reynolds glanced at Wade's body. "They know their leader is missing." Martha was already turning her horse toward town. "How many total in Dixon's crew?" 15 new men, plus Dixon himself," Reynolds calculated. 4 of the original Black Ridge Riders joined them. Seems they were out on patrol and missed your a poison." 20 against what?" Martha asked. 8 cavalry, maybe a dozen townspeople still able to fight." Reynolds' expression was grim. They've occupied the saloon and general store, set up firing positions covering the main street. Thomas watched his mother's face, expecting to see calculation, perhaps even doubt. Instead, he saw only cold resolve hardening her features. "Thomas," she said without looking at him, "take the gold and Wade's body to Captain Reynolds' camp outside town, then stay there. I'm not hiding while you," Thomas began. "This isn't a discussion," Martha cut him off. "I started this. I'll finish it." Reynolds cleared his throat. "Martha, even you can't take on 20 armed men alone." "I won't be alone," she replied, finally turning to face them both. "I'll have surprise, desperation, and 13 years of planning on my side. And I don't intend to fight them all." Her eyes found Thomas, softening slightly. "Your father once told me that in battle you don't need to defeat every enemy soldier, just break their will to continue fighting." Thomas recognized the shift in his mother's demeanor. The widow and even the vengeful hunter were gone, replaced by the battlefield surgeon who had seen the worst of human conflict and survived. "At least let us create a diversion," Reynolds offered. "Draw some of them out of town." Martha considered this briefly, then nodded. "Give me an hour to get into position, then approach from the east. Make it look like you're attempting to flank them." "And where will you be?" Thomas asked, already suspecting the answer. Martha's smile was cold. "Where they least expect me." The town of Redemption Springs had transformed into a battlefield. Bullet holes pockmarked wooden storefronts, broken glass glittered in the morning sun, and the distinctive smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. From his position at the edge of town, Thomas watched through his spyglass as Reynolds prepared his cavalry for their diversionary attack. He had disobeyed his mother, of course. The gold and Wade's body was safely delivered to the cavalry camp as instructed, but Thomas had doubled back immediately, unwilling to sit safely at a distance while his mother faced this threat alone. If she survived, she would be furious. If she didn't, Thomas refused to consider that possibility. Through the spyglass, he could see Blackridge riders positioned throughout the town. 2 on the saloon roof, 3 more inside with rifles aimed from windows, others scattered among various buildings. At the center of it all, pacing the main street like a conquering general, was a tall, broad-shouldered man Thomas recognized as Dixon, Wade's brutal enforcer. "Where is she?" Dixon shouted, loud enough for his voice to carry to Thomas's position. "Bring me the Hargrove woman and her brat, and maybe, I'll let some of you live to see sundown." No response came from the barricaded townspeople. Dixon fired his pistol into the air in frustration. "Wade's been missing since last night," he continued, addressing the entire town. "You've got 1 hour before I start executing hostages." Thomas's blood ran cold. Hostages? Reynolds hadn't mentioned hostages. He adjusted his spyglass, scanning the storefronts until he spotted movement in the window of Henderson's store. Civilian faces, women and children, guarded by armed riders. A flicker of movement on a rooftop caught Thomas's attention. For just a moment, he glimpsed a figure slipping between chimneys, his mother moving with the silent grace of a hunting cat, positioning herself above the enemy. A distant bugle call announced Reynolds's diversion, cavalry charging from the east, exactly as planned. Dixon barked orders, and half his men repositioned to meet this new threat, firing from cover as the cavalry approached, then withdrew in a feigned retreat. In that moment of distraction, Thomas saw his mother make her move. From the roof of the general store, she dropped silently onto the back porch, disappearing into the building where the hostages were held. Thomas held his breath, counting seconds that felt like hours, wondering what was happening inside. Suddenly, smoke began pouring from the general store's chimney. Thick, oddly colored smoke with a greenish tinge. Riders guarding the building stumbled out, coughing violently, some collapsing on the boardwalk. Through windows, Thomas could see confusion spreading among the hostages, but they weren't coughing. They were covering their faces with damp cloths, clearly prepared for whatever his mother had released. Dixon noticed the commotion, shouting orders as he ran toward the store. Before he could reach it, the hostages began streaming out the back door, led by Sarah Henderson herself, all still clutching their protective cloths. Chemical warfare, Thomas whispered in astonishment, recognizing his mother's strategy. The smoke wasn't affecting the townspeople because they'd been prepared, but the riders were dropping like flies. Through the chaos, Martha appeared on the saloon balcony, directly above Dixon. She dropped something into his path, a small glass vial that shattered at his feet, releasing another cloud of noxious vapor. Dixon staggered, firing blindly upward as the substance took effect. Martha was already moving, leaping to an adjacent awning and swinging down behind another group of disoriented riders. 3 more vials flew from her hands in quick succession, each releasing its toxic payload among the outlaws. Thomas understood now. This was war as his mother had experienced it, battlefield medicine inverted into chemical weaponry. She wasn't trying to kill all 20 men. She was breaking their ability to fight, creating panic and confusion. As Reynolds's cavalry charged again, no longer a feint but a genuine attack, Thomas made his decision. Abandoning his observation post, he raced toward town, rifle in hand. If his mother was bringing the battle to a close, he would be there to help finish it. By the time he reached the main street, half the Blackridge riders were incapacitated, choking and blind from Martha's chemical assault. Others were engaged with Reynolds's cavalry at the east end of town. Only Dixon and 3 others maintained some semblance of organized resistance, barricaded in the saloon. Thomas spotted his mother crouched behind a water trough, reloading her. Colt. He slid into position beside her. "I told you to stay at the camp," she said without looking at him, no surprise in her voice. "You should have known better," Thomas replied simply. A ghost of a smile touched Martha's lips. "I did. That's why I had Henderson distribute the protective cloths to the hostages 2 weeks ago, just in case." She nodded toward the saloon. "Dixon's holed up with 3 others. They've blocked the doors and windows." "What was in those vials?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious. "Modified tear gas, similar to what I developed during the war but refined with local botanicals. Temporary blindness, respiratory distress, disorientation." She checked her ammunition. "Non-lethal, mostly." "You never intended a bloodbath," Thomas realized. "There's been enough death," Martha said quietly. "These men followed Dixon and Wade because they're desperate, criminal, or foolish, but they're not the architects. The leaders deserve justice, the followers, perhaps mercy." A shot from the saloon shattered a window nearby, sending glass raining over them. "Although," Martha added dryly, "my mercy has limits." Reynolds appeared at the edge of the street, signaling that his men had secured the eastern approach. Martha nodded in acknowledgement, then turned to Thomas. "Cover me," she said, reaching into her jacket to produce one last vial, larger than the others, with a darker liquid inside. Before Thomas could protest, she was moving, darting between cover with surprising speed for a woman who had been riding and fighting without rest for nearly a day. Thomas provided covering fire, forcing Dixon's men to duck whenever they tried to target his mother. Martha reached the side wall of the saloon, flattening herself against it to avoid the shots ringing out from within. With practiced precision, she struck a match, lit a short fuse attached to the vial, and hurled it through a broken window. "Fire in the hole!" she shouted, diving behind a nearby water trough. The explosion was modest but effective, not enough to destroy the building, but sufficient to blow out the remaining windows and fill the interior with choking smoke. Coughing and cursing, Dixon and his remaining men stumbled out the front doors, weapons still clutched in desperate hands. "Put them down," Martha called, her Colt aimed steadily at Dixon's broad chest. "Your boss is dead. Half your men are incapacitated. The cavalry holds. The town. It's over." Dixon squinted through streaming eyes, trying to focus on Martha. Recognition dawned on his smoke-grimed face. "You," he spat, "the widow. Wade said you were nothing but a broken woman." "Wade misjudged many things," Martha replied evenly. "That's why he's draped over his own horse, headed for a pauper's grave." Dixon's face contorted with rage. For a moment, Thomas thought he would charge, despite the hopelessness of his position. Instead, the outlaw slowly lowered his weapon. "What happens to us now?" he demanded. "That depends," Martha said. "The poison affecting your men at Eagle Creek isn't fatal if treated. Surrender completely. Testify against those who escape justice today, and Dr. Abernathy will provide the antidote." She stepped closer, her voice dropping so only Dixon could hear. "Resist, and I've got 16 more formulations that can make a man wish for death long before it finds him." Something in her tone, or perhaps in her eyes, convinced Dixon of her sincerity. He dropped his gun in the dust and signaled for his remaining men to do the same. As Reynolds and his cavalry moved in to secure the prisoners, Thomas approached. His mother, seeing her in yet another new light. Not just the vengeful widow or the tactical genius, but a woman who chose mercy when revenge was within her grasp. "You could have killed them all," he said quietly. "After what they did to father, to the town, to the Meadow Creek hospital." Martha holstered her weapon, suddenly looking every year of her age and then some. "There was a time when I would have," she admitted, "when I first began hunting Wades. Men I left no survivors, but with each death I felt less human, more a weapon myself." She looked around at the damaged town, the wounded and stunned riders, the emerging townspeople. "This way there are witnesses. The story will spread. The legend becomes something more useful than mere vengeance." Dr. Abernathy approached, his medical bag clutched in gnarled hands, his eyes taking in the aftermath of Martha's chemical warfare with professional interest. "Magnificent work," he said, examining one of the incapacitated riders. "Some new compound." "I'll show you my notes later," Martha promised, then grew serious. "How many wounded?" 4 townspeople with moderate injuries, 2 cavalry with gunshot wounds. They'll recover. 5 of these outlaws with various ailments, not counting the chemical exposure. The old doctor shook his head. "Could have been much worse." "Miller?" Martha asked softly. Abernathy's expression fell. "Nothing I could do. He stood his ground at the smithy, gave time for 3 families to reach my surgery." Thomas saw his mother, absorbed this news, filing it away with all the other losses that had shaped her life. One more debt to be paid. Reynolds joined them, his uniform dusty but his bearing proud. "We've got all the surviving riders in custody. The gold's been secured as evidence. I've sent riders to Fort Buchanan for reinforcements and transport for the prisoners. And Wade's body," Martha asked, "will be properly identified, documented, and buried under military supervision," Reynolds assured her. "His crimes at Meadow Creek won't be forgotten again. The other deserters you encountered, we'll need statements about them too." Martha nodded, the weight of 13 years visibly lifting from her shoulders. "I have detailed journals, everything you'll need for your reports." As the captain moved off to supervise his men, Thomas touched his mother's arm. "What now?" he asked, the question encompassing far more than just their immediate future. Martha looked around at the town, damaged but surviving, its people emerging from hiding, already beginning to assess and repair. Her gaze drifted to the distant shape of their ranch on the horizon. "Now," she said softly, "we rebuild. I've spent 13 years living for the dead. Perhaps it's time to start living for the living." Sarah Henderson approached, a cloth still, clutched in her hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and newfound respect as she looked at Martha. "You saved us?" the storekeeper said simply. You knew they'd come for revenge, and you prepared us. I brought this on you, Martha corrected. Wade would never have threatened the town if not for my actions. Sarah shook her head firmly. The Blackridge Riders were strangling this town long before you returned. The protection money, the intimidation, the accidents that befell anyone who defied them. You didn't bring this on us. You ended it. Other townspeople gathered around, each with similar sentiments. Thomas watched in fascination as his mother, the secret avenger, the poison specialist, the widow with a deadly purpose, was transformed before his eyes into something else entirely, a hero. As the sun climbed higher over Redemption Springs, Martha Hargrove walked through the town she had saved, her son at her side, her mission finally complete. The legend of the healer would spread across the territories, but it would be a different story now, not of vengeance, but of justice, not of death, but of rebirth. And in the whispers around frontier campfires, a new tale would be told, of outlaws who kidnapped a widow's son, not knowing she had already poisoned their water supply. A tale of how underestimating one woman's determination had brought down an empire of evil that had terrorized the Arizona Territory for 6 long years. The Blackridge Riders were finished, their reign of terror ended not by an army of lawmen, but by a widow with the knowledge of herbs, the precision of a surgeon, and the patience of a hunter. The West would remember her name, and those who preyed on the innocent would learn to fear the quiet women with worn hands and watchful eyes. For sometimes the most dangerous predator isn't the one who howls its threats to the moon, but the one who waits in silence, poison already flowing through the water long before the first shot is fired. 3 weeks after the Battle of Redemption Springs, as the townsfolk had taken to calling it, a military tribunal convened at Fort Buchanan. Martha sat rigidly in her chair as she testified, recounting the atrocities at Meadow Creek Hospital with clinical precision, her voice never wavering despite the horror of her words. Thomas watched from the gallery, seeing not just his mother, but the complex mosaic of identities she embodied, healer, widow, avenger, and now reluctant legend. The proceedings lasted 5 days. Dixon and 17 surviving Blackridge Riders faced charges ranging from murder to theft to conspiracy. Wade's crimes, posthumously documented, cast a long shadow over the proceedings. When Martha finally stepped down from the witness stand, having laid bare 13 years of meticulously gathered evidence, the gallery sat in stunned silence. The military court thanks you for your testimony, Mrs. Hargrove, Colonel Wainwright, the presiding officer, said with unusual gentleness. Your service during and after the war has been extraordinary. Martha nodded once, her face a careful mask. Only Thomas could see the slight tremor in her hands as she gathered her notes, the sole outward sign of the emotional toll exacted by reliving those memories. Outside the fort's administrative building, Captain Reynolds waited with their horses. The verdict will come tomorrow, he told them, his expression solemn. But there's no doubt Dixon will hang, along with the worst offenders. The others face prison terms. He hesitated, then added, The Army wishes to commend you officially. Martha, a citation for your actions at Meadow Creek and for helping bring these deserters to justice. Martha's laugh held no humor. A citation for poisoning water supplies and developing chemical weapons? I think not, James. For surviving, Reynolds corrected quietly. For ensuring justice was served when official channels failed. The General. Veals, the General can keep his feelings and his citations, Martha interrupted, mounting her horse with fluid grace. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it needed doing. As they rode from the fort, Thomas studied his mother's profile against the setting sun. The weeks since the battle had changed her. The hard edges remained, but something else had emerged. A quieter strength, less brittle, more weathered but also more resilient, like desert wood that had survived both drought and flood. "You didn't want their recognition," he observed as they traveled the dusty road toward Redemption Springs. "No," Martha agreed simply, "because you're ashamed of what you did," Thomas pressed. Martha considered this, her eyes on the horizon. "Not ashamed, not entirely proud either. I did what was necessary. Nothing more, nothing less." She glanced at him. "But I won't be anyone's hero, Thomas. Heroes don't poison men, no matter how much they deserve it." "The townspeople might disagree," Thomas pointed out. "They've already started calling it Martha's justice, when someone outsmarts an enemy instead of outgunning them." A flicker of discomfort crossed Martha's face. Legends are dangerous things. They simplify complex truths into simple stories. I'm neither hero nor villain, just a woman who refused to accept that evil men could act without consequence. They crested a rise, and Redemption Springs came into view below them. Even from a distance, the changes were visible. New construction had begun where buildings had been damaged in the fighting. The main street bustled with activity, not just the usual commerce, but purposeful rebuilding. Most striking was the new structure rising beside Dr. Abernathy's surgery, a two-story building of fresh-cut lumber with large windows and a wide porch. "What's that?" Martha asked, pointing to the unfamiliar construction. Thomas smiled, pleased that for once he knew something his observant mother had missed. "The town council voted while you were testifying. They're building a proper clinic with a research laboratory." Martha reined her horse to a stop. "A laboratory?" "For you," Thomas said simply. "Dr. Abernathy is getting too old for full-time practice. The town needs a new doctor, someone with knowledge of both healing and the specific challenges of frontier medicine." "I never completed my formal medical training," Martha protested. "The war interrupted." "Abernathy says you know more than most practicing physicians," Thomas countered. "And after what you did for the town, let's just say there's no one they'd trust more with their lives." Martha sat silently for a long moment, absorbing this unexpected turn. When she finally spoke, her voice held a thread of wonder. "They're not afraid of me after what I did. They're afraid of you," Thomas acknowledged with a hint of a smile. "But they're more afraid of the next threat without you to protect them. Fear and respect aren't mutually exclusive out here." As they resumed their journey toward town, Martha's posture shifted subtly, not the rigid vigilance of the Avenger or the careful deference of the widow, but something new, something that looked remarkably like purpose. The clinic opened as autumn painted the surrounding hills in russet and gold. Martha stood on its freshly built porch, watching as townspeople gathered for the dedication ceremony. Sarah Henderson had organized everything, from the ribbon cutting to the simple reception afterward. "Never thought I'd live to see Redemption Springs with a proper medical facility," Dr. Abernathy remarked, joining Martha on the porch. His gnarled hands clutched a beautifully carved wooden box, a gift from Thomas, who had discovered his own talent for craftsmanship in recent months. "I still don't know if I'm the right person for this," Martha admitted, fingering the brass key in her pocket. Abernathy snorted. "Who better? You've seen the worst humanity offers and still chose to heal rather than harm in the end." "I harmed. And plenty along the way," Martha reminded him. "Yes," the old doctor agreed, "and that knowledge will make you a better healer. The best doctors are those who understand both how to save lives and, when necessary, how to end suffering." He patted the wooden box. "These old hands can't perform surgery anymore, but I can still teach. Between your knowledge and my experience, we'll train the next generation properly." Mayor Coleman called for attention, and the assembled townsfolk quieted. Martha was surprised by the turnout. Not just the prominent citizens and business owners. But ranchers from outlying homesteads, cavalry officers from the fort, even a delegation of local Navajo with whom she had begun building cautious relationships through her botanical knowledge. "Today marks a new chapter for Redemption Springs," the mayor announced. "From tragedy, we've found renewal. From danger, we've found security." His eyes found Martha. "And in our darkest hour, we found unexpected strength." The speech was mercifully brief. When it concluded, Sarah Henderson stepped forward with a simple brass plaque to be mounted beside the door. Martha expected it to bear her name, perhaps some flowery dedication. Instead, it read simply, "That others may live." Martha blinked back unexpected tears as she ran her fingers over the engraved letters. "Perfect," she whispered. Thomas joined her as the ceremony concluded, and people began filing inside to tour the new facility. "The laboratory equipment arrived yesterday," he told her. "I set it up according to your specifications." "Thank you," Martha said, meaning much, more than just the equipment. She looked at her son, no longer just the idealistic young engineer, but a man who had faced darkness and emerged stronger, who had seen his mother's true nature and accepted both its shadow and light. I'm thinking," Thomas said, unrolling a set of drawings, "about that irrigation system we discussed. If we modify your cultivation beds behind the clinic, we could grow 3 times the medicinal herbs with half the water." Martha studied the designs, impressed by her son's ingenuity. The last few months had seen him throw himself into supporting her work with the same passion he once reserved for his windmill designs. More importantly, he'd begun working with the local Navajo, learning their water conservation techniques and adding his own innovations. "It's good," she said, pointing to a section of the drawing. "But if we redirect this channel here, we could add desert plants that need minimal water but have exceptional medicinal properties." As they discussed the plans, Martha felt something she had almost forgotten, the simple joy of building rather than destroying, of planning for life rather than death. Later, as sunset painted the clinic in amber light, Martha stood in her new laboratory. Glass vials, so similar to those that had carried her weapons, now stood ready to produce medicines. The journals that had once documented poisons were being transcribed into formal medical references, with Abernathy adding his observations to her research. From a locked cabinet, she removed one final journal, bound in faded red leather, its pages filled with formulas never meant to heal, her weapons, her vengeance, her darkness. For a moment, she held it over the small stove that heated the room, considering. "Keep it," came Thomas's voice from the doorway. "Not to use, but to remember." Martha turned, surprised by his presence and his insight. "The woman who wrote those formulas is still part of you," he continued. "Denying that won't make her disappear, but you can choose which parts of yourself to nurture going forward." Martha returned the journal to the cabinet, locking it securely. "When did you get so wise?" she asked with the ghost of a smile. "I had a good teacher," Thomas replied. "Someone who showed me that our past shapes us but doesn't define us. That even after the deepest darkness, there can be light again." Outside, Redemption Springs settled into evening routines. Inside the new clinic, Martha Hargrove, widow, healer, avenger, and now physician, began organizing her supplies for tomorrow's first official patients. The poison expert had become the healer again. The water that had once carried death would now sustain life, and the legend of the healer would evolve into something more complex and more true, a story not just of vengeance achieved, but of renewal found in its aftermath. Winter came early to the Arizona territory that year, bringing rare snowfall that transformed Redemption Springs into an unfamiliar landscape of pristine white. Martha stood at her clinic window, watching as children darted through the snow-covered street. Their laughter a stark contrast to the grave matters that had occupied the town just months earlier. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Thomas entered, stomping snow from his boots, his arms laden with mail and parcels. "Supply wagon finally made it through," he announced, depositing his burden on her desk. "And letters from back east." Martha sorted through the packages, identifying medicines she'd ordered and equipment for the laboratory. Among the papers was an official-looking envelope bearing a government seal. She hesitated, then broke the wax with her thumbnail. "It's from the War Department," she said, scanning the contents. "They're finally releasing the full records of the Meadow Creek massacre, and—" She paused, her expression unreadable. "They've posthumously awarded commendations to the medical staff who died there." Thomas watched as his mother set the letter aside with deliberate care. "Is that good news?" "It's justice, of a sort," Martha replied. "Too late for those who died, but perhaps their families will find some peace." She turned her attention to a different envelope. "This is more immediately concerning." The second letter bore the letterhead of the territorial governor's office. Martha read it twice before handing it to Thomas. "The governor's coming to Redemption Springs," Thomas asked, surprised. "Why would he—" "Politics," Martha said simply. "Word of what happened here has spread. He wants to align himself with a triumph of frontier justice before the spring elections." Her expression soured. "He's bringing reporters from San Francisco and Denver." Thomas understood his mother's discomfort. In the months since the Battle of Redemption Springs, her efforts to maintain a low profile had been increasingly unsuccessful. Travelers went out of their way to visit the town. Dime novels with lurid titles like The Vengeance of Widow Hargrove had begun appearing in general stores across the territory. "We could leave for a few days," Thomas suggested. "Visit that Navajo healer you've been corresponding with about desert botanicals." Martha considered this, then shook her head. "No, running would only feed the stories." She stood, straightening, her apron with a decisive motion. "We have patients to care for. The governor can amuse himself however he wishes." Despite Martha's determination to continue her normal routine, preparations for the governor's visit transformed Redemption Springs. Buildings were freshly painted, streets cleaned, and a grand banquet planned at the newly rebuilt hotel. Mayor Coleman had requested Martha's presence at the head table, a request she had reluctantly accepted only after the mayor pointed out that refusing would draw more attention than attending. The morning of the governor's arrival brought an unexpected visitor to the clinic. Captain Reynolds, now promoted to major, appeared at her door in full dress uniform. "James," Martha greeted him, genuinely pleased despite the circumstances. "You're looking well." Reynolds removed his hat, revealing more grey in his hair than when they'd last met. "As are you, Martha. Frontier medicine clearly agrees with you." She gestured him to a chair, noting the leather portfolio he carried. "I assume you're here as part of the governor's entourage." "Officially, yes," Reynolds admitted. "Unofficially, I wanted to warn you. The governor has plans for today's ceremony that you should be aware of." Martha's eyes narrowed. "What kind of plans?" Reynolds opened his portfolio, extracting an ornate certificate. "He intends to present you with the Territorial Medal of Honor, publicly." "Absolutely not," Martha said immediately. "I told you at Fort Buchanan, I want no recognition." "I know," Reynolds sighed. "I tried to explain your feelings on the matter, but the governor is determined. This is an election year, and your story has captured public imagination across the territory." Martha paced to the window, her frustration evident. "My story has been twisted into frontier mythology. Those dime novels paint me as some avenging angel, not a woman who poisoned men and manipulated an entire town into becoming my unwitting accomplices." "Is that how you see what happened?" Reynolds asked quietly. Martha turned to face him. "Sometimes, on the dark nights when I remember the faces of every man I've killed. Other times," she gestured to the clinic around them, Other times, I find peace in what came after. Reynolds studied her for a moment. Perhaps that's what people respond to in your story, Martha. Not just the vengeance, but the redemption that followed. Before she could respond, Thomas burst through. "The door! They're coming!" he announced. The governor's procession just reached the town limits. Half the territory seems to be following him. Martha sighed, resigned to the spectacle ahead. Very well, let's get this over with. The town square had been transformed for the occasion. A wooden platform stood draped in patriotic bunting, chairs arranged for dignitaries, and a crowd larger than Redemption Springs had ever seen filled every available space. Martha stood to one side, uncomfortable in her best dress, as the governor pontificated about frontier courage and justice prevailing against lawlessness. "And so," the governor concluded, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "it is my great honor to present Martha Hargrove with the Territorial Medal of Honor, in recognition of her extraordinary service in bringing the notorious Blackridge riders to justice and protecting the good people of Redemption Springs." Applause thundered as Martha was ushered forward. The governor beamed, already imagining the newspaper headlines. As he raised the medal, Martha stepped to the podium. "Governor," she said, her quiet voice somehow cutting through the cheers, "while I appreciate the gesture, I cannot accept this medal." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. The governor's smile froze. "What I did wasn't heroic," Martha continued, her voice strengthening. "It was necessary, and more importantly, it wasn't done alone." She turned to face the townspeople. "Every citizen of Redemption Springs who stood against tyranny deserves recognition. Every cavalry soldier who rode to our aid, every person who chose justice over fear." She gestured to Dr. Abernathy in the front row. "If you wish to honor someone, honor this man who has served this community for 30 years. Honor Josiah Miller, who gave his life protecting others." Her gaze swept the crowd. "Honor the everyday, courage of frontier people who rebuild after tragedy, who choose to move forward rather than surrender." The governor attempted to recover, stepping forward with the medal still extended. "Mrs. Hargrove, your modesty is commendable, but—" "This isn't modesty," Martha interrupted firmly. "This is truth. And if there's one thing this town deserves, after all it's endured, it's truth." A moment of silence followed her words. Then, from the back of the crowd, someone began to clap. Others joined in, the applause building until it drowned out the governor's sputtering objections. Martha stepped away from the podium, the medal left unclaimed. As she moved through the crowd, people reached out to touch her arm, to whisper thanks, to offer silent support. Not for the legend she had refused to become, but for the truth she had insisted upon. That evening, as the governor's entourage hastily prepared to depart, their grand celebration cut awkwardly short. Martha sat on her clinic porch with Thomas and Dr. Abernathy. The town below had returned to its normal rhythm, the excitement of the day fading into the ordinary business of frontier life. "You embarrassed the governor," Abernathy observed, a note of approval in his voice. "I spoke the truth," Martha replied. "Something politicians rarely recognize." Thomas leaned against the porch railing. "The reporters seemed even more excited by your refusal than they would have been by your acceptance. One of them was already calling it the healer's creed, putting the community above personal glory." Martha grimaced. "Wonderful. Another chapter in the legend." "Perhaps," Abernathy mused, "some legends serve a purpose. Not the dime novel nonsense, but the core truth beneath it." "And what truth would that be?" Martha asked skeptically. "That justice comes in many forms. That strength isn't measured by how many you kill, but by how many you save." The old doctor's eyes twinkled. That the most dangerous person on the frontier might be a widow with a knowledge of herbs and the patience to wait for the right moment, despite herself, Martha smiled. "A cautionary tale, then." The best kind, Abernathy agreed. As darkness settled over Redemption Springs, lamps winked into life across the town, each one representing a family, a future, a community preserved. Martha watched them appear one by one, like earthbound stars. "You know," Thomas said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about expanding the irrigation system beyond the clinic gardens. With some modifications, we could help the entire town become more drought-resistant. Using my poison channels for water distribution?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "There's poetry in that." "There's future in it," Thomas corrected. "Your knowledge helped save this town. Now it can help build it into something stronger." Martha considered, and this as she gazed across the darkened landscape. In the distance, she could just make out their ranch where everything had begun, where a widow had plotted vengeance and found in its completion not the peace she had expected, but something more complex, a purpose that extended beyond the settling of old scores. "Very well," she agreed finally. "We'll begin planning tomorrow." As Abernathy bid them good night, and Thomas retired to review his designs, Martha remained on the porch alone. The medal she had refused now sat on her desk inside, delivered later by Major Reynolds with a note explaining that regardless of her public stance, the recognition was officially recorded. She would keep it, not as a symbol of pride, but as a reminder of the fine line between justice and vengeance, between necessary action and excessive retribution. A reminder that even the darkest path could lead eventually to light. The legend of the healer would persist, despite her efforts to correct it. But perhaps, Martha reflected, watching as the last light in town winked out, the legend wasn't. What mattered was the truth it obscured and revealed in equal measure, that healing and harming were two sides of the same knowledge, that justice and mercy were not opposing forces but complementary ones, and that even the deepest wounds, both personal and communal, could eventually mend. In the years to come, travelers passing through Redemption Springs would hear various versions of the tale. How a widow poisoned an outlaw gang's water supply before they kidnapped her son. How she used botanical weapons to reclaim a town held hostage. How she refused glory in favor of truth. Some versions would exaggerate her exploits, others would question her methods, but all would acknowledge the transformation that followed. For Redemption Springs had earned its name twice over. First as a place where water bubbled up from desert, stone, and later as a community that had found renewal after devastation. And at its center stood a woman who had journeyed from healer to avenger and back again, bringing with her the most valuable medicine of all, the proof that after darkness, light could return, and after vengeance, life could begin anew. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.